Hey everyone, and welcome to this Talk Insomnia episode where I think for the first time in the history of the channel, we have a guest that is on video here.
Woo!
Bryan, welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So yeah, as usual, without further ado, tell us, how you found my channel, connect with me, and then we'll talk about some questions.
Yeah, I had done a few Google searches for insomnia, and so then I found my computer, but I found your channel through that. And then I was looking at all the YouTube videos, and I was like, oh, I like the content. And I had been struggling. I think at that point, I'd been living with insomnia for about a year. So I had we become almost experts, right, in insomnia for those of us who deal with it. And I really resonated with a lot of the things that you were saying versus some of the original things when I started, all the sleep hygiene stuff that I had tried and just none of it worked. I felt your approach really spoke to me in my experience. So.
Very well. And in roughly like how long ago was that?
I've been living with insomnia, which I say insomnia caused by anxiety now is my new way of phrasing it, for about 2 years. So that was a year ago.
All right.
Yeah.
And then I think, I got an email from you a few days ago where you said like, Daniel, I bought your book. I want to be a guest on your podcast. So that's really happy. You were the first, as you know, I put in the book like a text, cell phone number and things like that. And I hoped people would reach out like you did.
Yeah. So anyone watching who who wants to reach out, I encourage it. I was happy to hear back from you. And it's always great to process insomnia and try to learn new tricks and just talk about it. So it's really a pleasure to be here. And the book was great.
Excellent. Very good. So yeah, just fire away. We can do as usual. I kind of talk about your story and that, or if you just have specific questions, whatever is best you think.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think like I can share a little bit of how it started for me. And, my hope with this is that, to learn new things, but also for anyone watching who's in the beginning stages or sort of really feeling frustrated, I'm hoping that this conversation, they can take something away from it. So for me, my insomnia started 2 years ago. There was definitely a specific trigger, but it wasn't in the sense, like a lot of times when I read insomnia stories, there'll be things like, and I'm not downplaying it. Everyone has a different trigger, but I think there's always, like, to your point, that precipitating event. A lot of people say I had a bad night at work, or I was a new mom or a new parent. Like, none of that was true for me. I'm 33. I was a young professional. I slept like a baby all of the time, right? Like I don't drink anymore, but at the time I did. And I enjoyed a glass of wine before bed. And I think at that time I unintentionally wasn't realizing what that glass of wine did for me. But I always slept great. Like I'd be able to nap on weekends. I was a great sleeper. And so I'm someone who has generalized anxiety. And so for a few months before the insomnia started, the anxiety kept increasing and I couldn't really understand why or find a reason. So to make a long story short, just after coming home one day after a doctor's visit, I just felt like not in a great space with my anxiety. And I was like, I'm going to take a nap. And naps for me historically were like these really pleasant, which sort of reset me and I wouldn't feel anxiety. And then when I took a nap this time, I had what I think you call, they're not hypnic jerks in the physical sense. It was more of that, like when you're right about to go to sleep, you sort of feel it and then like kind of panic. Yeah. And I had that. And the only other time I had that in my life was when I went through a really bad breakup where, you sort of after a bad breakup, sometimes you're really sad and you can't sleep because you're sort of really distressed over it. It felt a lot like that, which really confused me because I had nothing to be, there was nothing I can point to make me feel like that. So for me, that feeling was really confusing. I like really freaked out after it. I kind of just got into a really bad space. And unintentionally, I think what happened after was my body associated sleep as this bad thing, right? Because I didn't want to feel that again. And so for me, after I was closely monitoring sleep, I started little by little going to bed later because I was afraid to feel that. And then eventually it turned into, over a few days, like falling asleep late and then waking up like 3 hours later. But because I was so aware of everything, I couldn't put myself back to sleep. I would just sort of panic and not sleep. And so that's how it all started. And then after that, it was really bad, really, really bad for a few months. And especially the month or two right after was just like, I thought something was like, I couldn't comprehend what was happening. And I remember telling myself, I was like, wow, all those nights I joked about insomnia, like you have a bad night of sleep when you are a good sleeper. And I was like, I had insomnia last night. And I wanted to like, you know, smack myself in the past and be like, that is not insomnia. This is real. And I, you know, anyone who's dealing with it, I totally get it. It can really suck sometimes. So that's how it started for me. Yeah.
And then did you go through, I think you maybe shared a little bit of that, but you went through the usual path of like looking for sleep hygiene and maybe supplements, things like that?
Yeah, I became obsessed. Like I mean, all the articles, like my advice to anyone who's going through insomnia is like, you didn't pay me, this is not a marketing ploy, but like, just buy Daniel's book or you know, do the app. I had downloaded the app too. For me, I'm more of a reader, so the book resonates more. And I say that because when I originally Googled, there's so many unhelpful like things out there. You're usually going to encounter, at least for me, was like, turn off the light, smell a candle, meditate, you know. And then I would try all those things and none of it helped me. I still was anxious as hell. And then, you know, I would try some of the medications like, you know, melatonin, and none of that really helped. And so like, you just keep feeling like a failure. And you kind of allude to this in your book, but like you keep trying to force sleep to happen, which puts an incredible amount of pressure and obsession with like making sleep happen. So for me, I would really tell people is I get it. Googling is like, it's sort of a normal reaction because you kind of want to figure out, how do you solve this problem? What's the answer? And I can tell you, for someone who's been dealing with this on and off for 2 years, there is no formula to make yourself sleep, right? You just have to your point, have the perfect conditions and sort of allow yourself to drift off. But you don't know that when you start off. When you have this problem, you're like, okay, maybe if I do a backflip into a split and take 3 melatonins, I'll fall out. And I literally tried everything. Like I threw out the bed that I had. I bought a new bed. I reorganized my room. I tried all the medications, not prescription, because for me that really scared me. But I tried a lot of like natural supplements. Sorry, I just hung up on them. It's my job. Don't do that for folks watching. But I tried a lot of things, and what was really unhelpful in Google, especially, that I tell people not to pay attention to, and it took me a long time to not obsess over it, is I naturally have high blood pressure. It runs in my family. And it was something that I was trying to bring down and control. And every article you read on insomnia is like, you will have a heart attack. You will have high blood pressure. You will have crazy anxiety. And all that does is make you feel like, if I don't solve this issue in the next 2 days, you know, I'm going to keep getting worse. And so it became I didn't realize it at the time, but looking back with fresh eyes, you know, I was creating more of a problem for myself because I was making it this thing. And I'm not blaming myself. I did the best I could. But looking back, I was making it this thing that was like this, you know, it was this little thing that I grew into this huge beast. And it felt like a huge beast, you know, and also you will sleep eventually. I think a lot of people who deal with insomnia, you know, at the intense level that I did, you start to feel like, I'm just going to die because I'm never going to fall asleep. I can't seem to sleep well. And all this, you know, all these crazy, fearful thoughts come in. So skip Google, skip the articles online, because, you know, while there may be a handful of good ones, you really don't know what you're going to get. And I find a lot of the ones online are well-meaning, but they're very much for people who had a bad night of sleep. It's not for folks who are dealing with something that is a little bit different, which I think for those of us who come to your channels and others are not people who just had a bad night of sleep. So
absolutely.
That was long, but that's my story.
No, that was very good, and I think will resonate with so many people. It was so helpful, and okay, so you have that, and then you stumbled across my channel, and that was again quite a long time ago.
Yeah.
And then what happened after that?
Yeah, I mean, I had implemented some of the things that I had learned from your channel, and eventually I got to a place where I remember even telling myself, like earlier this year, I was like, I don't think I have insomnia anymore. And I got to a place where I was sleeping like 8 hours. I was sleeping really well. I did have mild sleep apnea, so I got the machine, but I don't really, you know, it was helpful. but my insomnia wasn't caused by that. And so I got to a really good place. And so the reason I hadn't really engaged is because I didn't need the resources at that time. I came back recently because I think the one thing that I'm trying to come to terms with is, like, even if you resolve your insomnia, like any condition, it can come back. It can be retriggered. And for me, when it was retriggered, it kind of shifted my world again. I had that feeling again of going to sleep in that panic. And instead of trying to, like, accept it and sort of ride with it or tell myself, okay, you won't sleep, it triggered a lot of that, like, past anxiety. I was like, shit, it's going to start again. I can't do this for another 3 weeks. I can't have another few months of going through this. And so I kind of had to relearn a little bit, some of the tips, because I found myself going into old, I think there's, like, how do you react versus how you respond, right? And I think what I learned from you is, like, how do you respond? Because naturally we react in certain ways, right, that we don't control or think about. And when I got retriggered about a month ago, I was just reacting again. And I found myself, like, Googling it. And, like, I remember maybe the first day after, I was, like, really obsessed. I was, like, YouTubing everything. I was, like, in the park drinking coffee and trying to find that solution again. And it took a few days, but I had to remind myself, like, there's no perfect solution, right? You just have to go about your day, throw, YouTube and Google away, and just have the best day that you can. And when it's time to sleep, you try, and I think for me, one of the things that I had to reject in terms of cognitive behavioral therapy, which I think can be really helpful, but one of the things that was so not helpful for me, but took me a long time to sort of reject and be okay with, and you kind of mentioned this in your book, is the idea of staying in bed, or, like, getting out of bed after 30 minutes. And for me, when the bed was the trigger, getting out of it for me kind of, like, reinforced that it was a bad thing. And I found organically that for me, the only thing when I'm in such a heightened arousal space is that I actually have to be in bed doing something I like, whether that's watching a YouTube video that's not about insomnia. I don't really read for relaxation in that way, but, like, I'm a huge wrestling fan, so I'll watch, like, wrestling matches. Not relaxing to most people, but for me, I love it. And so that was something I had to reject, because I found that if I can get into bed, talk to my partner, or, watch videos, or do something I like, that made for a much easier transition to sleep than, like, staying out of bed and then being like, okay, it's noon, or not noon, it's midnight, time to get into bed. And then it's like, oh shit, I got to perform. And then it just, like, anxiety increases to the max. So a little all over the place, but yeah.
No,
I'm
that
not
makes
sure if I
sense.
answered your
And
question.
that as you follow my channel, you probably seen some of I came from a place of, like, traditional CBT-I, and then with the years here, I've really realized that there are a lot of problems with it, particularly that one, the whole, like, 30-minute rule is not good at all.
Yeah,
But let's time frame here. Let's say you found the channel, you were starting to do really well. You kind of, like, you consider yourself not having insomnia, and at that stretch when you were doing well again, like, how long was that one?
I want to. I'm trying to think. The stretch of, like, sleeping really well and thinking it was cured was probably about 3 or 4 months. But before that, I was sleeping better. It just was I still had some issues of waking up a lot, but I had come to terms with accepting that. I was like, maybe this is just how I'm going to sleep, but at least I'm sleeping, right? Because before I would sleep, like, 2 hours. It was really bad. Now I was sleeping 7 hours and I wake up 4 times. I'll take that over, sleeping 2 hours. But I got to a point where I was sleeping 8 hours and I was waking up once a night. And that was about 3 months, but then COVID happened. So that kind of disrupted things a little bit. Just because I'm not somebody who likes to be home a lot. I'm very social and I'm an extrovert. So for me, I was like, oh, fuck, excuse me, can't curse. Edit that out, sorry. I'm somebody who has to be social. So I was like, so it created a little bit of, like, a different anxiety, which, and also it's shifted my sleep schedule when COVID happened, to the point of, like, I was starting to sleep at, like, 6 a.m, till whatever 7 hours is after that. So I was still sleeping. And so but then I was like, I need to get my sleep schedule back. So I sort of stay up one night and then try to shift it. It was a whole mess. And then the incident happened with the panic. And then it just so it was kind of like a little bit of a mess waiting to happen once COVID started.
Totally get it. And I have some questions about that. But before I want to say, like, you brought up a super, super important insight here, which is when you kind of like, you started learning on my channel, you started doing better. You weren't sleeping great, but you, instead of going like, dang it, I have to work harder so I get there, you were like, I'll take it. You kind of like, it's okay. And guess what? Then you did really well, right?
Yeah. No,
So
I
that,
think
I just want to point out that for anyone out there hearing this, when you're like, you're doing better, and then you're like, but how can I get even better? Take the other approach. Be like, I'm doing better, and I'll accept it. Paradoxically, that's when you really get better.
No, I absolutely agree with that. And I think it also just takes some of the stress of your day-to-day out, right? Because when you don't sleep well, you'll stay at work and you're like, oh, I'm tired. And I would be tired at work some days, and I was like, I'm tired, and I would try to really adopt that attitude of like, I'm not going to faint. I'm not going to, all these crazy fears you have when you're tired. I was like, I'm tired. I'll sleep later, and, hopefully it's better. But that definitely was helpful to accept it in that sense. And I was surprised. I didn't like when I started sleeping better, I didn't even think about it. It took me like 2 months to be like, oh, hey, I think I've been sleeping like pretty good. And then you get a little cocky. You're like, oh, I don't have insomnia anymore. I'm great. And then I think the lesson for me is like, it can, anything can trigger a bad night, right? Like a bad day at work, just a bad memory. And so I think part of that is also accepting that, like, yeah, you can have great days, but a bad day can come again, right? And or bad night rather, and how do you accept that so that it doesn't sort of what happened to me sort of knock you off in a really big way? How can it knock you off in a little way?
Which I wanted to ask you about, like, as you were, you had gone to a place where you slept really well for a couple of months there. Then naturally, a lot of us were stressed when COVID hit, etc. You started having some trouble sleeping again. And then you kind of went into that direction again of like Googling, searching for it, etc. In your mind, what was going, were you thinking like, I shouldn't be doing it, but I can't help it? Or were you kind of oblivious to everything you learned? Or
no, it was that. It was like, I know I shouldn't be doing this, and I know what to do, but I'm feeling so frustrated and needing a solution now. Let me just, and it's almost like an obsession, right? It's like your mind is saying Google or try to find the solution. And so it's hard sometimes to be like, okay, accept what it is, because it's almost like a soothing thing in a weird way to look and to be like, okay, I can do this. But it easily becomes a very unhealthy, unhelpful obsession, because you quickly find, I'd be like, I've read this article before. You're like, oh, this article's not helpful. And then it's just, it's a bunch of information that's like overwhelming, but retriggering. And then you're just like, oh my God, nothing out there helps, blah, blah. And I also think like the hardest thing when you're in that situation is that there is no immediate solution, right? Like there's nothing you could tell me or anyone could tell me that would guarantee that the next night's going to be an amazing night of sleep, right? Or that it's going to be resolved in 2 weeks or in a week. And I think that's the hardest thing to sit in and accept, because I think as humans, when we have a problem, we want to solve it, right?
100%.
So I think that's what lends itself to a lot of the re-Googling, because you're like, I need to find a solution now, because I can't, the fear then becomes, it's almost like a ticking time bomb, right? It's like, midnight's going to come soon. You got to figure it out before midnight.
Right.
And so it's hard.
Totally hear. And I think, for everyone that's tuning in here, I want to say there's another really important teaching point here, which is when you have gone to a place where you sleep better, you start having trouble again, it may certainly feel like, dang it, I'm back where I was 2 years ago. This is crazy, but you're not. You are not back there, because you have learned things. And that's why, you got to a place where you slept better again much quicker than you had the first time.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's true. And reflecting, like I'm sleeping. This happened like maybe a month ago, where I was sort of having trouble, but within like 3 days, I was starting to, I still had that fear and that anxiety around it, but I was starting to sleep a lot better, like 6 hours. Now I think last night I slept 7 or 8 hours. I woke up like once or twice, but I know to accept those things. And it wasn't, the first time it happened, like, I kid you not, I would go days like sleeping 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, no hours. Now that doesn't happen. I can mostly average at least 6, at least 7 hours. And if I'm anxious before bed, I tell myself something that I learned on, I don't know if it was from your book or somewhere from one of your channels, was just to accept it, right? And just say, like, I will sleep at some point. I look at my phone and I try to go like this at the top so I don't see the time. I wish that, iPhones would find a way to scrub the time, because there is no way to do it. I tried. So I'll just go like that. But when I get into that space of, like, I know it's, my bedtime and I'm still a little up or anxious, I just really tell myself, I'm like, I'll sleep when I fall asleep, do something I enjoy. And eventually it may take an extra hour, 2 hours, but I eventually fall asleep. And that's why for me also with the CBT-I, it is important for me to be in bed, because I'll find myself, sometimes if I'm having a particularly anxious night, I'll find myself falling asleep and then waking up, and then my reaction is like, get out of bed right now, right? And sometimes, that happens, but I'm now doing more of the, okay, I'm anxious, it is what it is, let it pass. And then I'll lay down again, and it'll happen again. And I'll be like, oh my God, why? And then I'm like, just relax. And then I'll lay down again. And then at some point I'm like, oh, I think I had a dream, and then once that starts to happen, you become a little bit more relaxed. And then it's, you're like, oh, I slept a good 5 hours. I can get up. So those aren't the best nights, but I find that before, what would happen is I would get up, and then I would, like, go outside and walk around the block for like 20 minutes. And then I would go back to bed. But then as soon as I got back to bed, the anxiety would heighten again.
Yeah, 100%.
Then I'd get out. So that's why for me, the 30-30 rule is a little bit difficult, because I found it had the opposite effect.
Yeah. I think honestly, for most people, it does.
Yeah.
And I was just on tip of my tongue. I was like this, like I have to say
Sorry.
thing now. Now I'm forgetting it. But it was something about, oh yeah. Now it came to me. It was this one, how what you're, when you're in bed, you're kind of feeling a little bit anxious, and you're like, it's okay, I will sleep when I sleep, etc. Another way to rephrase that, which is like, when I say it, it sounds kind of a little triggering, but I think it's so true, is that what you're doing at that time is basically you're willing to have some insomnia. You're like, it's okay. And that is so important. When you're willing to have some insomnia, like, sleep comes to you.
Yeah, I agree. When you're willing to be just, like, uncomfortable, it takes time, but you start learning little by little, like, I'm not going to die. It's not going to harm me. And on the worst days, I get out of bed, but I don't go outside anymore. I try not to. I'll go to my living room and, stay there for like 20 minutes or so and read something. But that's really if I feel like I've tried. I want to say tried, but I feel like I did my best to sort of accept it, and it's just not working for whatever reason. Then I'll get up. But getting up after that first initial sort of panic, I find that it's better for me to just try to stay in bed and, like, breathe through it. And, sometimes I'll open my eyes and sort of maybe go on the phone for a little bit. But for me, it has to be in bed, because it helps calm myself in bed and then fall into sleep, versus getting up. And then as soon as you get back, it's just like, it's like you jumped out of the lava, now you're back in the lava. Whereas
Right. Right.
I don't have the opposite analogy for that. Like, if you stay in the lava, because you don't want to do that. But when you stay in the lava, you realize it's not lava, right? You're like, oh, it's more of a warm bath.
That's a good one.
So,
I love that one. That's a good one. And so the other one, and it's funny, I was just writing this kind of this blog article about, like, speed bumps, which is the same thing as most people say I had a setback, and I'm like, let's call it a speed bump, because that has, like, a nice, like, you get past it, set a ring to it. But one of the points I'm trying to make here is that that they're really important. That when you did really well, and then you hit the speed bump, and then you got past it, what will happen is that you'll be less afraid of speed bumps in the future. You'll be like, if I have another anxiety episode, then I got past the last one, and then they'll be far and few between.
Yep. And I think that acceptance, I think a lot, like, the one thing I've I've been in obviously therapy for anxiety and at times depression. And one of the things we learned and that you learn in Insomnia as well that I think is important is accepting, right? Accepting what is. And I think a lot of times that's a hard thing to understand at first, because if people are like me, my reaction to that was like, hell no, I don't want to accept this. I want to solve it. I want to fix it, and I want to move on. And then you're almost like, how ludicrous of whoever to accept it. Are you crazy? You're saying that because you haven't dealt with it. That's sort of the reaction. But what I realized and what has helped me is that part of accepting it is that it actually, and your book helped me realize this, in articulating this better to myself and to others, is that it lessens the natural arousal response of the body, right? Because when you reject something or you don't accept it, what happens is it becomes this huge threat. You're constantly trying to fight it. You're constantly like on edge, but when you accept it, it's not about saying like, this is pleasant or I love this. It's not, right? Like, it's not like saying like, you're my buddy, but it's about saying like, you know what, for whatever reason or for a reason I understand, I feel anxious right now. And it is what it is. And I don't love it, but it's here. And I know that it won't always be here. And I'm just going to, either try to go to sleep, or if it's during the day, I'm going to keep going about my day. And that to me is what acceptance is, right? It's about like, when you actually do accept it, you're able to move through it and then, in a sense, solve it or be in a better space. But when you reject it, it's constant. It really prolongs, I think, the healing process, because you're constantly fighting a battle that you can't win, right?
Yeah.
Like, so.
Exactly. And the way, you read it, so this, the way I phrased it is something like, that reaction is so helpful to us humans when we face a real physical threat. That's what the reaction is for: fight, flight, get away, escape, whatever. But when it's not a physical threat, when it's like anxiety, insomnia, whatever it is, that makes it seem like the threat is bigger because nothing works, and then just spiral out of control there. So absolutely. And by the way, I don't want to miss to say that. Thanks so much for the review.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I really want, I came to you because I read the book, and I really want people to read it if they can. It was a really easy read, and I felt like, there were some main points in there that you repeated over and over. And I think important because it helps stick. Like, I don't want to give the book away to anyone. So that's why I'm, sort of not sharing everything. But at the end of it, like, it was clear to me sort of like what causes sleep, the conditions you need, and also like sort of really like, I think set it, forget it, sort of gives away what you're saying in the book, but it's really true, right? Like, set it, make your plan, understand the plan that works, and then try not to revise it and let it go, right? Don't Google, don't YouTube, don't spend your day being like, I'm not going to sleep, and those thoughts will come, right? Like, you can't, but it's like when they come, instead of saying like, oh my God, I'm not going to sleep, I'll be like, oh, I'm feeling fear right now that I won't sleep, but I will deal with that at midnight. Let me go for this jog, or let me go for this walk. Let me watch this video. It's, to me, that's the acceptance and forget it part.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The feedback that you had is very similar to somebody else who actually, because the book really is very similar to the content in the app in BedTyme. And somebody said there, I like the way how you kind of hammer the same message. And I never thought about it myself, but I guess it is that core message, like the more you try, the less you get, in like 150 variations of it in a way. So I think that does seem to be helpful. Yeah.
No, it's helpful because you gave different scenarios for each. And so, some of them I was like, yeah, that's me. And then others, I was like, that one's not as relevant to me, but so I'll move on. But I think, for anyone reading it, there's something, you start to see naturally in a reactionary sense, like, oh, I did that, right? And like, I'm realizing that my natural response wasn't actually helpful, and I have to do something different. And the accepted part, I can't say it enough, is the most helpful. It's hard, like, I don't want anyone to think like, oh, you accepted and you're not anxious anymore and you're living a beautiful, lovely life. No, like, things happen, it's hard, but it is the thing that helps you get through it, and over time learn that it's not. And I think that's for any form of anxiety. And that's why for me with insomnia, I used to say before, like, oh shit, like now I have insomnia clinical depression, and now I have anxiety, clinical depression, and now I have insomnia. I'm like, oh, I just am so lucky, right? Where it took me a while to realize, like, I don't actually have insomnia in the sense of like there's something physiologically wrong with me that I can't sleep. It's like this is my anxiety showing up in a different way.
Yeah, right.
And that for me was helpful because I was like, oh, okay, it's an extension of my anxiety. It's not this third thing added on to destroy my life, which is 100%. What it felt like at first. I was like, I can't even sleep, and then during the day I got to deal with anxiety, and so it took a long time, and for anyone who's really going through it right now in the worst of times, like I feel for them. It's difficult, it's hard, and I really encourage them like to put down YouTube, really try to spend your day doing things that you enjoy. Read the book, just because I feel like it gives a great foundation for people. And try your best to accept, that you won't sleep great some nights. And to really, I think for those who typically get out of bed, because bed, like for me, is a huge trigger, really try to watch some TV in bed, maybe an hour or two before. Even during the day, like I had to start training myself to enjoy bed because, after what happened and then all the advice at the time of like, don't use your bed unless it's for sleep and sex. I would become obsessed with that. Like it was like, I can't touch my bed until nighttime. And I lived in a studio at the time because I live in New York City. And I was like, I want to lay on this bed. Like I want to relax in it. I was like, no, you can't go on it because it's not bedtime. And I just found that really unhelpful. So, for folks, use your bed if you can relax in it. If it's to read a book or watch a video you like I actually find that helps to show like, oh, bed it can be a relaxing place versus avoiding it at all costs until bedtime. So
that's fantastic. It's like, this is why one of the reasons I love to talk to people like yourself that has trouble sleeping or had it, etc., is that you always learn something. And now what you said now was like, I never thought of it, but that's so logical actually. When you had all this struggle in bed and the bed, some people say my bed became a battlefield, etc.
Yeah,
and actually purposely spending time in the bed during the day to just kind of become friends with your bed again makes perfect sense. I never thought about it.
Yeah, I find it really, really helpful for me because, when you're in bed during the day, obviously I'm not there all day. It's like maybe for 20 minutes, 30
exactly.
minutes. But it's helpful because first of all, you're not trying to sleep, right? And so you don't have that same kind of like, oh my God, I got to go to sleep. And you're able, and I actually found that first when I would go to bed, I get a little bit of that panic and I would just have to like go through it. And then I would, watch a nice video and it helped. And it really does help. So I think that's helpful for the people who's when bed is a trigger. Because I know for some people who are dealing with insomnia, bed's not always a trigger, right? It could be something else. But for many of us, like bed is the trigger, right? And so when you're spending more time out of it or only allowing yourself to use it for sleep, I find it can be really difficult. And so trying to re-love it and become friends with it again, I think is an important part of the healing process.
That was a great insight. Very good insight. So very cool. Yeah. Otherwise, how are things in New York right now?
New York is hot as hell. Very, very muggy. Like we have nice weather, but it's like the moisture in the air just makes you sweat. So it's nice. I'm so lucky to be here because there's so many things you can go outside, social distance, and you can still sort of take in the whether you want to take in a man-made area, but there's also a lot of natural areas. So it's very, very nice.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, cool. I think anything else I want to add or? I think it was great. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing the video and everything.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Daniel.
Anytime. You take care now, Bryan, and stay in touch, okay?
Yeah, I will. I'll let you know when my next episode happens.
Awesome.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.